In this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate knitting in the round using double-pointed needles. As always, if you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. The easiest way I have found to learn how to use double-pointed needles is in a situation like the crown of a hat, where you've established the knitting on a circular needle, you're gradually decreasing stitches, and you're at the point where the circular needle is really too large to continue working in the round, especially as you continue to decrease. Now I find this to be easier because you have some knitting established. You have just a stable base of knitting that you can work on, and you can focus on working with the double pointed needles rather than also focusing on establishing the knitting. Now double points typically come in sets of 5, and most knitters will configure the needles in one of two ways. They will either divide up the round into 3 parts, and so a third of the stitches are on each part. They might divide them up unequally for reasons. So one configuration is a triangle. This produces a really stable triangular formation. The other configuration is to divide up the stitches into 4 parts so that you have a square. And in this configuration, then you'd have a 5th needle as your working needle. But regardless of how many needles that you have, you're only ever knitting off of one needle and onto the working needle. These other needles are simply acting as stitch holders. But the trick with double pointed needles is that when you have finished working off of one needle and you're about to start on another one, your working needle gets introduced and you have 3 tips all in the same place at the same time. And that's where you need to learn some new techniques. I currently have 72 stitches on the needle. So if I divide this into thirds, I would want 24 stitches on each double point. If I wanted to divide them up onto 4 needles, I would have 18 stitches on each needle. I want the needle that has the working yarn attached to it. That needle tip is going to go underneath. It's going to sit perpendicularly underneath the needle that I'm going to work stitches off next. And then I bring the working needle into it. So my working needle comes above the old needle as well in order to insert into this first stitch. And you can see I can let it flop a little bit while I do that. But then I can bring it up and work my first stitch, and then I can continue working after that. So I have 18 stitches on this needle. If I wanted to work another 6 stitches to have 24 on here, that's really going to push the limits of this particular needle length. These are 6-inch needles. If I had an 8-inch needle, then I would feel better about putting more stitches onto this needle. But if I put too many stitches onto one needle, they can start sliding off the end. I've got 18. I'm going to add my next needle. So again, the needle with the working yarn attached to it comes under the needle where stitches are about to be worked. I bring in a new working needle, and it comes above the old needle as well. And then I can work this stitch. If you find that you have a big gap between the old needle and the new one because of at this transition, when you enter this second stitch, then you can tug on the working yarn and take out any slack that's in there. Don't yank too hard. You don't need to yank excessively. Okay, I have 18 stitches on this needle. These stitches that are still left on the circular needle are kind of stretched around on the cable, so I can pull on that tip a little bit to help allow stitches to come up onto that tip. Once again, old needle is under the new needle, and the working yarn is introduced into the mix. I have 1 more needle to go, and then the entire round will be on double points. Old needle is underneath new needle. Working yarn comes in above old needle. And now all of the stitches are off the circular needle. I can put that to the side. And now we can see how the round is in this collapsible, flexible square. So now I'm ready to work completely in the round only with double pointed needles. And at this point, I need to start working some more decreases to reduce the stitch count even lower. I'm doing 8 decreases in my decrease round. So I have one decrease in the middle of the needle and the other one at the very end. If I divided this up onto 3 needles, then I wouldn't be working every needle exactly the same. I would still be working decreases at the same rate, but each needle would be different in terms of how many decreases I'd be doing on it and where they were on the needle. So that's another reason why you might choose to use 3 needles versus 4 to divide up your stitches. If you had 6 decreases per round, you might find that 3 needles with the 4th as a working needle would work better. I'm going to cast on 30 stitches, and in this first method I'm going to cast on as many stitches as I can onto one needle. So I managed to get all 30 stitches onto one needle, but I want to divide them out onto 3 needles altogether. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip stitches off the back end, not on the end where I'm just casting on stitches, because that could loosen these stitches up, because there's available slack right here that could get introduced into those stitches. So I'm going to slip off the back instead. So I've got 10 stitches on that needle, and now I'm going to put 10 on another needle. So now I have 10 stitches on each of the needles, and I'm ready to work my first round. The other method is to cast on just as many stitches as you need onto each needle. So I'm going to cast on 10 stitches onto the first needle. And now I'm ready to do my next cast on. So this is going to feel like it's in the way at first, but you're going to take your new needle and you're going to bring it through. I'm doing a long tail cast on. I'm going to do my cast on. I'm going to let my thumb out of the thumb loop. I'm going to snug it up as much as I need to get, I don't want to be super tight. You never want to be super tight with a long tail cast on, but it's the 2 stitches are touching each other about the same as they would be if they were on the same needle. And now I can continue casting on the rest of the stitches onto this needle. So with that needle dangling, that might be in your way. It might feel like it's in the way, which is why you have the option of just slipping stitches off the back end of another needle. So now I've got 2 needles dangling and I have to introduce my third one. I'm going to snug that up just so that it's the same as it would be for any other stitch. Not super tight, but not a huge gap between them either. And then I'm going to continue on, and you can see that I've got, needles in the way. So, this just might feel like it's too much. The more needles you add, the more of a pain it might feel to you. So that's why you always have the choice of slipping stitches off the back end of a needle if you need to. I said I wanted 30 stitches, but I think I actually want 32 so I can do a knit 2, purl 2 ribbing. So I have 10 stitches on each needle. I'm going to add 2 more to this last one. This is the start of my cast on, and this is the end where the working yarn is attached. And so I'm going to lay these down in a triangle. You can see that I have the point coming up here, and I have the cast on edge is on the inside of these needles here. So I can see that the edge is always on the inside. There's nothing kind of twisted around anywhere. I want to make sure that that nothing is twisted around. We can always make a correction at the end of the first round, but to start, we want to make sure that we have the cast on edge all on the inside. So I have the needles pointing up right here, and here's the working yarn. I'm going to need to bring in my 4th needle. So I'm going to pick them up, and remember that the needle that the working yarn is attached to sits underneath the needle where you're going to knit off of. And this is tricky because there's no knitting to keep everything stable. So that's going to want to fly off in all directions. So it's just the tension on your yarn is going to keep it in place right now. So you bring in your working needle, you come into that first stitch and you knit it. And then you can just take some slack out. I'm not pulling super tight. I'm just taking slack, any slack that there is. And again, once you enter the second stitch, you can use that as an opportunity to pull out some slack. Again, don't yank it with all your might. You shouldn't be needing to yank it with all your might. So sometimes you want to rearrange your stitches based on keeping all the needles all the same or based on what stitch the needle is starting with. When I work in the round and I'm starting a new needle with a purl, I always do a Norwegian purl. So just keep in mind I'm actually doing a purl stitch here even though the yarn is in the back. Then I move it to the front and do a regular purl. It's just, I find that easier for me when I'm starting with a purl. You don't have to start with purls. You can start with knits. So now I have finished my first round. So at the end of the first round, I want to make sure that this cast on chain is still completely on the inside of the round, because this is the point where if there was a twist, I could fix it. So let's say I got to the end of the first round and I can see that my edge is getting pulled over the top. I can fix it at this point by bringing that needle tail underneath and straightening everything out so that it's all not twisted. And then I can begin my next round. Double pointed needles come in a wide range of lengths, from 4-inch needles used to knit glove fingers to 16-inch needles used with knitting belts to knit sweaters in the round. They also come in various materials such as bamboo, wood, aluminum, steel, and plastic. Every knitter has a preference for the types of tools and techniques they like to use. I prefer slick metal circular needles to bamboo. I prefer magic loop over double points when working small circumferences, and I prefer 5 double pointed needles over 4. But there are times when a set of 4 bamboo double pointed needles turns out to be a much better set of tools than any other for a particular project. Even if you have distinct preferences for particular tools and techniques, it's worth learning to use different tools and alternative techniques. You never know when they might come in handy. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.